Conversation, but some of these panel sessions I've run previously, the best way I think is more questions and we get a bit more interaction. So quickly on myself, 10 years professional engineering experience across government, procurement, building services, HVAC design, actually working with Benmax Maintenance and Services, and one of the properties in our portfolio is 480 Northbourne Avenue, which is the first all-electric office building in Canberra. So I've got a few stories from that in terms of, I guess, almost 3 years now since it was built. And yeah, we work with a number of clients in terms of electrifying their assets and looking at what opportunities there are to decarbonise and these sorts of things. Next we have Belinda Headley, leads ACT Property Group. They deliver property and asset management services to ACT government-owned and leased properties. ACT Property Group facilitates the provision of services to the community through the provision of properties that house a range of organisations and functions. And just in the middle there. Next we have Gareth Alverson is the National Sales and Marketing Manager of Civium Strata and Facilities Management. He's worked in real estate for half a decade in the strata and facilities management space. Gareth provides a consultancy service for owners, executive committees and developers, particularly on sustainable infrastructure and long-term livability methods of strata complexes. Next we have Dr. Michael Thomas. Dr. Michael Thomas is a software developer with the battery storage and grid integration team within the ANU College of Engineering, Computing and Cybernetics. Speaking with Michael earlier in the week, they do a lot of work in terms of modelling at the moment and looking at what electrification will mean for the assets, for the grid, and all these sorts of factors. Next we have Belinda Reid, bringing over 25 years of experience in the property sector. Belinda is recognised as a market leader in the promotion of innovative concepts and making them reality for her clients. Currently managing a number of Canberra's top-tier strata complexes, Belinda has a wealth of experience in rolling out both time and cost-efficient outcomes for strata communities. She leads with a strong focus on the impacts that our rising population growth has on our environment and advocates the promotion of projects that are aimed at reducing energy costs, where Australia's rising cost of living can be mitigated through government-led initiatives as well as community-led programs. Most recently, Belinda has been engaged with a number of community members and local authorities assessing the impacts that newly applied technologies are having on Australia's flora and fauna, while balancing the long-term local and global benefits these enhancements are providing for people living in urban communities. Last, but certainly not least, we have Catherine McConnell, who is the founder, CEO and chair of Bright, an Aussie scale-up on a mission to make sustainability affordable and accessible for everyone. Bright connects a network of over 2,000 clean energy vendors to flexible green payment solutions and government partnerships. Bright is the exclusive administrator of 2 state government sustainable finance programs, the $280 million ACT Sustainable Household Scheme and the $50 million Tasmanian Energy Loan Saver Scheme. Catherine is a non-executive board member of the Australian Finance Industry Association and a council member of the University of Wollongong. Prior to setting up Bright in 2015, Catherine spent 16 years in banking and financial services. This year, Catherine was named the winner of the BNT Women Leading Tech 2023 Sustainability Crusader Award. So as you can see, we've got quite a well-accomplished panel. As I said, I do have some pretty cool questions here, which I'll rely on if we need, but I suppose one of the first questions I might open to the panel with is, as a tenant or an owner, what's an advantage of going all electric? I'm sure who wants to jump in first?
Is that working? Can everyone hear me? So in ACT government, I don't know whether all of you know, but we actually own a lot of our properties. So under ACT Property Group branding, we actually have 230 assets under that umbrella, together with about 35 leased assets to landlords. So we actually have been implementing strategies from a landlord perspective and from a tenant perspective. So I might start with the landlord perspective first. And obviously I'll start with Dixon office building. You might all know that's a fully electric building. So when we went to market for that one, the imperative was to stand up the first non-fossil fuel building in the ACT. That was constructed in 2020, and that was based on a lease deal with the landlord for a 20-year term to incorporate that as part of the deal. We've had no problems with that, and it does have solar also on the roof, which offsets some of the costs for the landlord in implementing that. Now, that was a little bit easier because obviously that was a new construct, so it wasn't a retrofit, but we do have sites currently that we're negotiating where we can retrofit existing buildings, where we're continuing to either exercise an option or enter into new lease arrangements. And landlords are coming to us with solutions to move from fossil fuelled HVAC to electric HVAC. What I can say to you with some of those dealings, we've been negotiating through longer lease terms, or we've been negotiating through reduced incentives. We've just done a deal in Woden, which will have that building up and running from an electric point of view by 2026. So as long as we have a transition period from the landlord in relation to our lease term, that they will convert the building, as long as we can meet that obligation and it's not beyond 2040, then that's a possibility that we can negotiate during that lease term. In relation to owned assets, we actually have our own office building, which we've got at 255 Canberra Avenue, and we're going through a progression at the moment about converting that ourselves. So yes, it can be done. I wanted to let everyone know. I get questions about substation upgrades. So the thing that we mitigated with that was to make sure the thermal loading of the building was sufficient. And it's an older building is what I want to say to you. So part of the program will be to replace the windows and some of the thermal imaging around the building to capture the heat inside the building, which would mitigate the requirement to actually upgrade the substation because the energy would be the same, the usage would be the same. So we're going through that at the moment. We've got a delivery date for 25-26. So what I want to say to everyone, we don't have all the answers, but we've sort of invested in our own assets, and it's a journey for us, and we're willing to provide any learnings from that journey in relation to once we've implemented.
I suppose on the back of that question, I'm wondering, Michael, from you might have some insights there, I guess, into some of the research areas and what's going on there in terms of looking at these commercial buildings and what does it mean in the bigger picture, right? I think you've touched on obviously landlords' requirement for a bit of investment there, and obviously the Basic Property Group are working alongside there to make that investment more achievable and affordable. But on a technical level, I suppose, what do you see as maybe some of the hurdles that we're trying to overcome at the moment?
Yeah, so very good question. So yes, the transport upgrade problem is one of the big ones, and either going through that upgrade process on the electrical infrastructure, or to find ways around it by sort of generating, storing and consuming power much more locally. So it'll better network sort of setups. That's one feasible solution, but it's going to be a sort of a different solution depending on each circumstance of each building. So there's not going to be a one size fits all, and that sort of sits on the spectrum as well. But for instance, like the AED is going through a decarbonisation program at the moment, which is called Below Zero, and part of, I think it was about 30% of our emissions come from heating, for gas heating at the moment, and so there's a big retrofit program going on at the moment to swap out the gas heating with electrical heating. And so that's going to necessarily increase the loading of our network, and it's also going to be shifting our heats from midday in summer, which has been using the aircon, to winter in the morning. And that's going to really set the limits on the transformer and the poles of wires in our network. Could do a bit more modelling on it, but there may be some breaching on that, so we have to work out some ways to get that.
From a strata perspective, have you had any examples, I guess, within Canberra of electrification projects, and whether that be integrating EV charging basements, whether it's looking at domestic hot water generation and how that's being achieved. Belinda, I'll start with you.
We don't at the moment have any of our buildings that are currently embracing the EV charging stations and electrification as a building whole. I might pass over to you if you've got any input on that, but once we've covered that, I might just touch on the fact that the environmental impact and environmental factors is a very on-trend thing for investors and people that want to be part of a community that's very on trend in terms of having environmental considerations as part of their day-to-day livability and being part of a proactive community in strata communities. I might pass you on the question.
Yeah, no worries. So we do have a few, and we've got it slowly, or as quickly as we can. But there's obviously a lot of considerations with these projects, with electrification projects. We do have developments in the city where there's a instalment of EV infrastructure, especially from inception, so that's quite easy. And there's usually good uptake with that in a demographic like our city-based clients. But then in our kind of markets outside of the city, say the Woburn Centre, we've got EV infrastructure in those buildings, but the uptake is less in those regions. So the conversations are different based on where we're having them, but really the process that we're taking with retrofitting infrastructure is really trying to get some professional advice in the first instance. So we always recommend to our clients that there's some sort of consultancy that happens, and we'll go out to electrical engineers or external third-party consultants for that professional advice. And then our role there is really to facilitate that conversation and then pass that on to our executive committees and owners for their consideration. And from there, there's approval processes. So we've had a few that have gone through that stage where it gets passed by an ordinary resolution. So 50% of the owners say, yes, we would like to embrace this infrastructure. And from there, our role is really just project management. So we will then coordinate, the contractors to come on site, any communications that need to go out to owners and residents. And I will say, when it comes to electrification, that's been happening on our mixed-use developments. So they're developments that have commercial tenancies as well as residential tenancies. We haven't had any examples of it for our commercial-only buildings as yet, but as I said, these conversations are starting to bubble up, and we're hearing more and more about it. So it's very much owner-driven at this stage. Where owners are coming to us asking what the opportunity is here. So that's kind of the role that we're playing so far.
And I might just add to that from a government point of view, we are actually invested in where we sign the lease deals, the ability to put EV charging stations in. And across our portfolio, you'll know that we've got at 220, we've got 6, and we're actually increasing that now. We've got at Nahara, Alara, at Dog, we've got 20 at the moment. We're actually engaging with our landlord, who's actually going to procurement for another 35. At our own site in Canberra Avenue, we're putting 38 in. We can see the advantage of doing it. I think where the standstill is at the moment is how can we utilise more broadly, because at the moment they're in office buildings, and on the weekend those office buildings might not be utilised. So I think there's probably a conversation at some stage, is there an ability to be able to have them utilised for other purposes when they're not being utilised by government staff. But we've definitely invested in it. We've learned a few things along the way about the kilowatts that are required for each station, about where you position them, those sorts of things. So we can provide some information if that's, if you ever go out. We also have a range of people or companies that have been quite reliable in the systems that they've provided as well. So more than happy to provide some information about that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's what this is, right? Like, I was interested to hear about what the speakers on this panel have to say, because 12 months ago we had owners coming to us saying they wanted 100% of car spaces in a basement garage to have an EV charger at the end of them. Now the conversation is evolving more to what can we do with smart charger in a communal car space, because there's conversations happening about petrol stations kind of retrofitting and having some sort of smart charging facility. So there may not be that requirement to have an EV charger at every basement point, every basement car park. So I think these conversations are really going to progress quickly over the next 5 to 10 years. So it's It's as much about information capture from wherever you can find it.
It's definitely the retrofit buildings that are the key concern. We have a number of our strata medium to high-rise buildings, which are essentially landlocked buildings. The only place for those buildings to have their EV charging stations is actually in the car parks, which are underneath their building. There are some complex considerations to think about with that, namely, those electric fires and how we're going to navigate that when in these buildings all they have is the water sprinkler systems. So if you have an electric fire and you have a water sprinkler system, typically speaking, electric fire and water don't mix. So we need to think about how we're going to navigate that where you've got buildings that don't have external land areas to supply those EV charging stations and what those fires might mean for retrofitting things like additional HVAC, extracting the fumes from these electric fires, making sure that your community is safe before putting these systems in, and making sure that you are considering things like your fire engineers, your electrical certifiers, making sure you're getting consideration to HVAC engineers. A fire that might be confined within a car park might give off, say, 70% of fumes, but in an outside environment, it might be reduced to 30% of fumes. So we do need to take it step by step, as our friends here have said, moving the puck step by step, and each building's needs is going to be unique to that building, and making sure that you are seeking the appropriate expert advice before going gung-ho and putting this stuff in, making sure that your risk mitigation is also considered whilst you're looking at the on-trend right now environmental wants and desires when we're wanting to put this stuff in, making sure that we're doing it in the right way.
Perspective, you've also been involved with a number of sort of residential schemes and stuff. In the commercial setting, do you see, is there things on the horizon? I'm not sure how much you're able to share, but...
Yeah, I've got some permission from ACT Gov to be able to talk about a program that is on the horizon. And so, as you may know, Bright's been so fortunate to have been selected as the program partner for the ACT Gov to roll out the Sustainable Household Scheme. And so that primarily has helped a lot of households, but it's also helped community groups and landlords. But there's a program that's on the horizon, so maybe by the end of the month, multi-unit development in apartments and accessing strata multi-unit developments to be able to access solar. So there's going to be participation from the Australian government and the ACT government, and so funding will be provided $1.8 million from each of those parties. And so eligible apartments will be able to apply to put solar on their apartment block, and they'll be able to get 100k divided up between a rebate and also an interest-free loan. And so that's going to be amazing, and it's the first program that we know of its type, so we deal nationally directly with different individuals and also with other state government programs, and it's the first program that we know of its type that's going to be tackling strata and multi-unit dwellings. And so it's effectively trying to create not just the financial incentive, but it's also looking at streamlining the process of the program because it's very complex, it's very messy, and so it's not something that has a really scalable solution. So, I think really, hats off and kudos to the ACT Gov who are trying to, tackle messy problems and really lead the country. And I know it's something that other states are looking at how they could, replicate this type of program. Commercial is often quite a lot at the bottom of a strata building, so it has impact on commercial, not just on residential, as far as landlords and tenants. And there is an answer. It's all being worked through, how the program's going to work and how it's going to play out. But I think it's it's really exciting to know that it's all starting off in the ACT.
I think it's also important to note, I suppose, that ACT is sort of leading the way for a number of these electrification objectives, and I think talk from my own background in terms of heating, ventilation, air conditioning, the heating requirements in Canberra are quite unique. Obviously, we get the coldest colds, we get the hottest hots, so the take-home message I've had from a number of events like this is still that if you can do it in Canberra, you can almost do it anywhere in the country. So I think we'll open up just if there's any questions before I keep some pre-cooked. Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
We'll just get a mic to you, mate. If you want. All good. or you can,
I can
up to you,
yell.
mate. Yeah.
I'm curious about the few properties that gets you've been electrifying, particularly the mixed use. The experiences from the, I guess, leasing out those, the commercial ground floor, commercial. There have been any issues with that, or where it's limited what can go in there, or what interest there is in general?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about the commercial tenancies when it comes to electrification, we haven't had it yet where we've had an electrification project for, say, cooking, if it's a commercial kitchen. The feedback that we get from those types of tenants is that gas is preferred. So it's always, I think that's going to be a bridge that we will cross eventually. Obviously with the Power in Canberra plan and the initiative there to have this conversion happen by 2045. So it'll be interesting to see how that technology evolves to kind of mitigate those sort of issues. But other than that, our commercial tenants are usually pretty, I wouldn't say apathetic, but they're kind of, it's a conversation that's being driven more by the residential lots in those buildings as opposed to the commercials. And the commercials do receive indirect feedback. We've got one building that has had solar infrastructure installed, so obviously there is a common property electricity benefit to that, so they do benefit from savings there. But other than that, yeah, I'd say it's more those ones like we manage buildings down on the Kingston foreshore. Obviously there's a lot of hospitality-based businesses down there and food and beverage, so that's going to be where these conversations get pretty interesting.
And I might just, from a government perspective, just so you all know, we've actually got an endorsed policy now, endorsed by Cabinet. So moving forward, any government organisation would have to seek an exemption if they go into a building that's not fully electric or that doesn't have a plan to fully electrify. So from our perspective, we won't be entertaining something where the lease term doesn't have a conversion criteria in it. Our perspective is the largest components such as HVAC, but we are looking at hot water systems and the likes. So I just want to be very clear that the only exemption, minimal exemptions, I'll give an example, if it's a 12 months or less lease, has to come from the Chief Minister. So likely that directorates won't be going and asking for an exemption on that basis, but moving forward we're trying to work with landlords to come up with solutions, not immediate ones, but throughout that lease term, just to be clear.
Any more from,
My name is Rakesh, I'm from Institute Advisory. The question I have is on the strata level. So, for example, we have a community with say 20 or 40 townhouses, and every townhouse is owned by individual occupant. And when you have a rooftop solar system, and what is the take on ACT government in terms of a community battery for such a scenario? The reason is you can have a rooftop solar, you can have a battery and you can't have battery, and you won't save the energy. And if you have a community battery for that, say 40 townhouses or 50 townhouses, you can pass energy from one house to another house based on the demand. So is there any strategy in place for the ACT government to have that community level battery system?
Wow. I think because it's still quite early days, when you're talking about having collaboration from an owners corporation, you really are looking at a thorough education process and bringing together, I guess, a majority longer term outcome, because to look at something where there is individual and communal benefit, the investment into some infrastructure like that is something that people are going to question whether or not they're going to be staying at that complex for the long term, or if they're going to be investing in something that they might not be there in 2 or 5 years' time, and whether or not that for an individual is going to be something that they're going to want to buy into, or are they going to look after themselves as a unit-orientated benefit, and maybe use that as a key sell or an investment for their own personal use. I think for each complex, again, depends on what that building's environment looks like and whether or not they have the space and the space and the aesthetic elements and things like that, and whether or not people as a community owners corporation want to buy into that as a long-term investment. It's not something to take lightly in terms of, because it looks like a good idea. There's a lot of input in terms of expert reports, expert consulting with the owners corporation, ACT Fire, and of course making sure that annually they're compliant with the emergency services compliance on an annual basis. Whereas if they're looking at it as an individual, they only need to be concerned with themselves. Do you want to add anything to that comment?
So I think the only thing to add there is Belinda's 100% right. Like, these consultancy reports aren't cheap. You're looking at about $10,000 to $15,000 for the reporting alone, based on the size of your complex, obviously. And this is relevant to both commercial and residential. And then from there, it becomes an open discussion about the infrastructure costs, which are obviously quite significant. You know, you're talking about factors of hundreds of thousands there. And so, like, great to hear that there's initiatives from the government there to support that, because that does assist in those conversations. But, you know, it also does depend, and as I said, most of our experience has largely been on the residential side as opposed to the commercial. But if you've got a building or a development that's highly tenanted, so a lot of residential property management's in there as opposed to ownership, they may not directly see the benefit of this energy infrastructure. So, and then owners are probably less likely to be motivated to make these large investments, because they're not necessarily going to see the direct benefit from it themselves. So it is very building dependent, but for us it's kind of, as I said, just trying to push the puck forward. And in the meantime, there seems to be these great initiatives coming forward. We're even seeing new technology such as smart metering, where there can be a certain allocation of kilowatts to each unit, and that can be capped, or that can just be delivered on a first in best dress basis. So that's really interesting technology to keep an eye on and watch, because I think that's probably the way we'll progress here, and hopefully that means that there's more benefit for the owner's pocket as well.
I think also, to answer your question, you're looking at perhaps the investment versus the return in terms of per unit capita, what that looks like in terms of the investment. If you're looking at something where there's 150 units, or medium to larger, some 400 plus units, the buying power for a solution like that looks more attractive than perhaps a 40-town house, where the investment for the long-term benefit might be a little bit more of a stretch for the average townhouse owner or investor.
Can I just add a little bit more to that? So maybe it's very building dependent, this answer, but so I sit on the executive committee of the apartment building I'm in, and we had 100 kilowatts of solar installed last year. Roughly half of that gets exported back to the grid, and so there's a lot of value in that if we use it on site. And so a lot of people have asked about putting in batteries for the building, but what I'm advocating for instead is swapping out our common gas hot water to smart electric hot water, and with storage, and that's essentially a thermal battery of that point. And so you can capture that excess, heat up your water, kind of have mostly free water, or free hot water for the year. So there's other different bits of technologies that we can integrate into the systems to deliver additional benefit that you might not otherwise have. And for apartment buildings anyway, everyone wants hot water, so and we have the gas phase out in 2045, so it's kind of no-brainer from that point.
I have a couple of questions in my mind. I'm just wondering, just Michael, what we've got you, I suppose, from, we talk about electrifying commercial buildings, and we've mentioned HVAC, we mentioned hot water. Canberra obviously doesn't have a huge manufacturing sort of sector. However, I would think that the ANU probably does have some particular labs and things like that which do have a bit of a reliance on some high temperature stuff, which electrifying may be quite challenging. Is there any work in that space, or any sort of case studies that you've been a part of or aware of in that regard?
High temperature stuff. Not necessarily around high temperature stuff. I know some of the biology labs, they have to autoclave the equipment they use, so that's all sterile. But there is some domestic hot water usage, but cooking and taps and that sort of thing. There's also the colleges that have more residential-like usage profiles. But the really, like I know out in industry, for example, this is maybe a bit of an aside, but the really high temperature stuff like looking at gas, like hydrogen gas to replace those processes out, that can't be
Yeah, okay. No, it's interesting. It's just, I think everyone sort of thinks the gas is turning off 2045 and it's such a big deal. And then you think, yeah, we've sort of already got some solutions to some applications, but there are some which are still, up in the air. So it'll be interesting. It's definitely a watch this space. It's sort of, transition. It's a one step forward. I don't think there'll be a silver bullet for a lot of the parts of commercial buildings. But
yeah, I think that's a take-home message as well. There's no silver bullets.
Anything come from that?
Do we have an idea whether there's well, maybe this government program or a government program in the works to deal with decommissioning gas throughout these strata complexes? Given that it's a multifaceted kind of issue, right? Unit owners will own part of the system, other issues owned by the common property, but that's a kind of a political decision amongst a bunch of people with different opinions and can be fairly expensive to do. And I imagine you can't just leave the equipment there. I've probably just lost the train of the question there, but is there a government kind of perspective on that as a larger issue?
And I specifically can't answer that because we're commercial. I can from a residential perspective.
Yeah, so I know the government does a lot of work, around getting off gas, particularly for residents. And so I can speak to the multi-unit dwelling, which is specifically incentives around solar, putting solar, but I think that there are other things in the train that I can't talk about. But can you talk about them?
We do have a team, the integrated energy team, and they're working thanks Sarah, they're working on the policy and the processes of how we are going to get to 2045 because there's no silver bullets, but it might be best if we get contact details and put you in contact with them because it's a developing area. So possibly they're not at the point of the specifics of what you're talking about, but certainly the complex buildings is something that's on the agenda and they're working hard, the policy team are working hard to come up with viable solutions for that and looking at what happens to the gas network when we're all electric. There's definitely work happening in that space. I'm happy to have a chat with you afterwards and put you in contact with the specific people who can give you far more information than I can.
I think that's a great question. Whilst we're looking at sustainability and putting in this new innovation, what does happen to the redundant systems? You've got gas pipes. You want to put this stuff into strata buildings where a lot of the time that common service cupboard space that might run up and down a building doesn't have a lot of space where you might need to install new equipment, new pipes, new cabling. And what happens to those gas pipes that feed into units and the equipment? And at what cost does it take for an owners corporation to actually remove those redundant systems whilst we're considering putting in the new sustainability assets? I think that's a great question.
Any more from the audience?
AMC Architecture. We do a lot of interior fit outs and things like that. Is there any incentive, like in general, we obviously get our clients to install electric appliances, but for the general building overall, obviously the HVAC and things like that might not actually be electric. Is there any incentive that we can give the actual owners of the building for these fit outs to change the system over, like while we're doing other retrofitting?
So maybe this is a bit of an aside, but one of the main reasons, at least in my apartment building, to get rid of gas is the risk management of future gas prices. I don't know if commercial, that would be an argument to make to commercials, but that's our main consideration.
And I guess jumping in on that, you've also got the environmental consideration. I took a flight over to Western Australia only in the last 10 days. I was fortunate to get the window seat, but it was quite heartbreaking actually to look at the environmental impacts. Gross chickenpox essentially is what the land looks like now when you're travelling over that bottom half of WA. I flew over there 20 years ago and it was not like it is today. We've got to think about what we're doing to our land, what we're doing to our non-renewable resources and to the environment at large, and what this sustainability means to our legacy of what we're doing to our land use, to our vegetation and our flora and fauna, and a lot of the damage is irreparable, and what that's going to do long term to our environment.
Hi, I'm Jada from Canberra Health Services. I'm keen to get, I guess, a commercial perspective on how you see data and technology supporting better decisions at a management level around buildings and asset replacement to support greater sustainability outcomes.
I might actually have a bit of a go myself. I suppose sort of working in sort of the HVAC maintenance side of things, and I was just actually in a presentation a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things we mentioned there was that a lot of these buildings, you know, we talk about the challenges of electrifying an existing asset compared to a new build. Right? New build, wet concrete, you've got the opportunity to get space correct, get electrical supplies correct. You can engineer and design things. The existing building, you don't have that flexibility. However, what you do have is you have an existing building with an existing plant in it. So some things we've been in touch with our clients about is, you know, we can set up 12 months of monitoring, and you can actually really understand, well, how much heating do I actually need in this? Because again, with a wet concrete building, you've got safety factors, you've got all these sort of risks you're trying to cover. But then once the building is there, well, you can set up some metering, you can set up, you know, there's analytics opportunities, there's all sorts of products out in the market that a lot of BMS providers even have for these commercial buildings, where you can set up these logs for a 12-month period, and you can see, all right, well, the coldest day we had last year was minus 8 degrees on June 10th. All right, we're going to have a look at that and see, well, how much heating did I actually use on that day? You might find straight away you actually go using 2/3 of what your gas plant is currently doing up there, and then you go, well, okay, if I'm electrifying, I don't need that. I can peel things back, and you don't actually have to concern yourself with that safety factor that you would have in a wet concrete job if you invest in that sort of that metering and those sorts of fact-finding missions essentially, and then similarly for the cooling in the middle of summer again, you set your cooling. So I think there are opportunities out there to do that, and I think that's an opportunity that is actually relevant to existing buildings as opposed to the wet concrete buildings. So,
I've probably got one at a bigger level data, not at like micro level, but I had a call with Google last week, and so they were demoing their technology around Google Earth and Google Maps, and they've got a Sunroof API, and so it's just being developed, and it's not real time yet, it's near time, but the amount of data that they can access, for instance, they're doing a project in New Zealand, just all desktop analysis, where they can assess how much solar is in all of New Zealand. They can differentiate between rooftops and commercial buildings, and they can also differentiate between what's there and what capacity is, and also existing capacity, number of panels that are there. And so I just think that type of data, and I think they were saying just for like hits, if you do a hit to the website, I think it was $50 for 1,000 matches. And so that cost is only going to come down. So they're also talking about how they're wanting to expand into energy efficiency. They're wanting to, use data they have and information to expand into, what's happening with batteries, what's happening with heat pumps, insulation. And so I think, when you've got companies like that who are making it as part of their sustainability mission, their sole mission to be able to say, how can we do more here? And also, they've got staff in Australia, I think there's lots of data we'll be able to get access to.
What a great idea. I think this is a great idea. You could be running this hand in hand with the ACT government initiatives on sustainability schemes. Get that information up front so you know what the needs of the building are going to look like and forecast long term with those seasonal changes, and making sure that whatever scheme or sustainability application you're looking at meets the needs of your building, and having that data in advance is most valuable.
Just conscious of time, I'm not sure if we can keep kicking on or happy to keep going. All good. Do you have any questions? I do have one which might help.
I would like to ask the strata companies, you said there's obviously there's obviously a period of time to get approvals for good ideas. In your opinion, how does that process work and how long does it take? Generally speaking, like optimistic perhaps.
it's a bit how long is a piece of string at the moment, and it's very building dependent again, so there's no one size fits all response to that, but the metering is a really big thing. So that, as I said, our first stage is always that consultancy, and there's already always a metering period there, so you're probably looking at a decent period of months there, so you can get some good data to go back to the community with. So, I mean, some of these reports that you can get can look at a couple of days and take a metric from there, but we do want that data first of all so we can make informed decisions. From there, it's about, you know, some buildings will often do an informal vote ahead of time and see if there's an appetite from the ownership to start pursuing this infrastructure, whether it be solar or EV is the main ones that we're talking about at the moment. We do have buildings that are talking about the gas boiler systems on their roofs and retrofitting those with electric, but that's a longer term decision for them. Where it tends to get stuck is when it gets to all ownership, so when we start getting to presenting the actual financials and the reality of the scenario, and especially as, you know, interest rates have been doing what they've been doing, and the conversations are starting to get a bit harder with our communities on, you know, showing a $500,000 bill in some respects and getting owner buy-in there. But you know, if we can pass that ordinary resolution, as I said, and get things moving, it's a matter of years. It's not, you know, we're not talking about month-long projects here. It's a matter of years before we see this stuff come in and owners benefiting from it.
I concur. I think you've got a lot of socio-economical factors, and each building size and external environment and the durability factor for each building is quite unique. But I would concur with yourself that we're talking into years before they're considering their longer term benefit.
Yeah, and as an example, we've got a building in the city which had infrastructure for 38 EV chargers from conception, from new development. They were exhausted within, well, it was less than 48 hours, just less than 48 hours. And she'd completely purchased those out, but then we had a wait list for another additional 50 EV chargers. And this is in a unit development of 250 lots. We're at a stalemate now because the infrastructure, the backbone infrastructure required to install that next 50 is obviously a large cost, but how do we distribute that? If you distribute it across the 50 that have shown an interest, it's a very large expense individually and they're not prepared to pay it, but then the rest of the building is also not prepared to pay for infrastructure that they're not going to directly benefit from either. So this is where these conversations have to be moulded a little bit, and instead of looking at a direct EV charger at the end of each car parking space, we're talking more about communal charging to facilitate that requirement that we have right now. And then, you know, in 5 or 10 years, we don't know what this landscape is going to look like. There might be petrol stations where the battery's dropped in and out of the car and that's everyone's solution, you know. So I think we're just trying to, the word is probably not put patches, band-aids over these problems, but offer alternate solutions to get these communities through while this tech space is moving so rapidly.
And just to piggyback on the back of that, you've also got the considerations of, again, expert consulting as part of that, and the additional costs separate to the installation and removal of the redundant systems. The benefit, of course, to the communal system that we've just been discussing is you've got collective control of shutoffs. So instead of having a hybrid pick and mix, if you like, of different stations or installations per unit, by having a communal installation system, which is what we were just touching on with the 40 townhouses earlier, the communal benefit is communal safety as well, risk mitigation, making sure that the fire application systems and collective shut-off, if there is a thermal spike that might trigger a concern, can be shut off, and having that universal control to protect and preserve that community.
Good afternoon, everyone. Really good panel. Thank you for your insights. My name is Jagreep, and I'm the CEO of a tech company based out of Perth. And we are sort of trying to work with startups and work out the payment mechanisms for whether it's a communal charging solution or whether it's an individual. So I just want to get some comments on, from a startup manager or startup company, what are some of the key things that matter when it comes to the payment mechanism for EV charging?
Sure. I might just jump in that one to lead on the answer. I guess at the moment you've got, again, it's the retrofit buildings that are the key concern for us. The buildings and the technology now, they're expecting to have this infrastructure as part of that building's build. It's already part of that plan. But the retrofit buildings, you've got some key concerns like, I guess a little bit like in car parks, you've got common area GPOs, power points. You've got EV cars where they want to plug their car into common property GPOs in the car parks. And then somebody else might say, well, I don't want to be paying for somebody else's EV, benefit. I don't have an EV. Why am I paying for somebody else to take power from common property power sources? The benefit of communal systems is, particularly if it's pay per use or pay per code, you might have individual PIN codes or something to do with how that asset is being calculated on a pay per use. And I think that's a much fairer way for people to think, okay, well, we all can benefit. We know it's coming. We know we're going to need this infrastructure as we embrace the next generation and the next 10, 20 years. What's that going to look like now? I would say people are wanting fairness. They're wanting to know that they're not paying for somebody else's benefit in today's market and today's livability in strata. So I think it's a matter of making sure that whatever infrastructure is being applied where people's use of that energy resource is being fairly attributed to that user of that energy resource. Is that answering your question?
Yeah, sort of. I can touch up later.
Yeah, sure. Yep, sure. Have you got something to say about community use versus individual on use of energy?
You answered it.
All right, I think we're at time now. I think we will get, panellists will be around for questions and networking afterwards. I'd just like to extend my thanks to the panellists for today. I think my take-home message is that it's a big puzzle and there's many pieces to it. Coming from an engineering background, hearing more about the economic and the socio-economic and the cost side of things, it's all part of the journey we're on, I guess, for this electrification objective. So, yeah, it'll be interesting, and yeah, we'll be also thanks ACT Government for putting on the event. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.